We lost, get over it. The mental block that we may need to get through if we want to rejoin the EU. This message is for people who want to rejoin, though others are welcome to listen too. I'm not saying that everybody in that group has this mental block. I'm also not claiming to be immune myself. So here is a serious message for EU would-be rejoiners. The issue is, do we focus too much on the 2016 referendum result, how it came about, who made which arguments in 2016? Am I saying we should completely ignore this? No, and I'll explain that further. But there is a danger in obsessing over it. Who am I? I'm Mike Cashman with Augusta Lees. I wrote It's My Party and I'll Lie If I Want To, which explores lies about Brexit and other matters in parody and satire and sketch. And the book has 140 videos linked directly from QR codes in the book where you can see Augusta singing or perhaps me with a poem or a sketch. So the book takes you to 140 satirical videos, but this video is a serious one about this question of we lost, get over it. Now, I am aware of the irony of saying we shouldn't obsess so much over this and making a video which is all about it. But I believe this is important, and I have some personal experience that's relevant, which I'll share later in the video. To express this, I do have to talk about it. Let me describe the way of thinking that I'm concerned about with an analogy. It's a football analogy, could probably apply to any spectator sport. It can feel like that we had a significant playoff game and we lost. Maybe we felt that the other team's tactics were unfair, but we're thinking that if we happen to have another playoff game against the same team, then this time we might beat them. Rivalries are strong, passions are aroused. Like any analogy, it's not a perfect analogy. In football, the masses encourage the few, but in politics, the few try to persuade the masses. So victory comes from the size of the crowds. But here's where this way of thinking can lead us astray. So I said, maybe we're thinking that if we have another playoff game against the same team, then this time we might beat them. But in the case of rejoining the EU, them then is not them now. The them isn't the same them. In the football analogy, we expect those who supported our opponents to still support our opponents in any further game. In the rejoin EU question, we don't expect the allegiances to be the same. Indeed, we want them to be different. Now, some of you may be thinking, oh, but I already welcome everyone who voted Brexit that's now changed their minds, and, for example, a Remainer Now group flourished on Facebook. But I have in mind those who have not yet changed their minds. The danger is that the more we focus on 2016, the more we entrench and solidify the almost tribal loyalties that developed then on both sides. I've said before, we cannot win the 2016 referendum, but we can win the referendum of the 2020s, or whenever it happens, to rejoin. So what do I mean by the dangers of focusing on 2016? Well, I'm talking about being insulting towards Brexit voters, emphasis on I told you so, saying, well, I'll never forgive them, saying, well, they should have done their research. Basically, any blaming of the 2016 Brexit voters. Now, if you're in some sort of post-traumatic stress over Brexit, and to some extent we all felt a fair amount of that stress, then maybe you feel that some of these behaviours may ease your pain. But my emphasis is on the objective of rejoining the EU, and for that, I don't think any of these behaviours help us. No one ever got persuaded by being insulted or being patronised. Let me tell you about an experience I had in the 1980s, where I did a tour of duty for a short time in a competitive selling environment. I was seeking to persuade users of computer mainframe database management systems who had committed to and purchased a rival database management system a few years earlier to switch to our product, which is something that hardly anybody did then. What I rapidly worked out was that what did not work was to say to people, you know that decision that you made a few years ago? Well, you were idiots. That product is rubbish. our product is much better. What was more successful, and I was successful in that role, what was more successful was to take the approach of, so, a decision was made in this organisation a few years ago for a number of reasons that were seen as significant at the time, but let's look at the situation now and see what would be best for your organisation at this point. It's respecting people's intelligence rather than insulting it. And so this is why you may have heard me suggest that we don't say you were conned, and we don't even say you were lied to, because if we say that, the fact that we're telling people that they were lied to implies that we think that they were conned. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to tell them. People voted for Brexit for all sorts of different reasons, and some are more disappointed than others. I'm not suggesting we dodge direct questions from those who are open to discussion. For example, if someone asks, do you think we were lied to in 2016? I would answer the question. But the more that we choose to focus on 2016, the more that we encourage entrenched positions. If you attack people for the way they voted in the past, they may well tend to defend. Now, some will say that we don't need to persuade any more Brexit voters because the demographics and the changes of mind that have already happened are enough. But we only have to look at our politicians to know that these changes are not enough yet. We have a bigger majority wanting to rejoin the EU than wanted to leave, but the politicians are not yet persuaded. For politicians of all parties to be persuaded to reopen the EU question, we need a massive popular majority, and we can get it. Now, am I saying that we should agree with misleading statements made in 2016? Should we compromise our honesty for the sake of good relations? No. And I think we can be as robust as we want to when talking to those who promulgated some of those messages. But I don't want to blame anyone for the way they voted in 2016. We lost, get over it. Does that mean we let politicians get away with what was said then? No, not at all. But redress is already happening as public opinion changes. The mills of justice grind slowly, but they grind exceeding small. The reason that the opinion polls are only going one way on this is that more and more people are seeing the costs and disadvantages of Brexit, and there's almost nothing coming the other way. The promises were hollow. There was a brief boost for Brexit support during the COVID vaccination rollout, based on the lie that Brexit had enabled that rollout. But whether because people saw through that lie, or just because the memory has faded, that boost of public opinion support for Brexit has disappeared. So as people assess the costs and disadvantages of Brexit versus benefits and advantages, there is very little on the positive side. So events are changing people's minds. And those people who recently changed their minds are the ones most likely to persuade the next wave. But what can we do if we're in conversation with a Brexit voter? I simply suggest asking these questions, seeing if they're open to a conversation. What were your reasons for voting for Brexit? How do you think it's going? Leading to either, would you like for the UK to rejoin the EU? Or just, do you think it'll be 30 years, so the next generation, before we join the EU again? Or do you think it'll happen sooner? And if they question the inevitability of joining within 30 years, ask, why would the younger generation want to stay out? They didn't want to leave in the first place. By the way, I do believe that Leave voters also need to get over the 2016 referendum. The claim is that that vote mandated Brexit. Well, Brexit happened, so any such mandate has been fulfilled, has been delivered. There are some that suggest that any referendum can never be questioned ever again. If that was the case, we would never have had the 2016 referendum. So, do we all need to get over 2016? I've given you my view. Your comments are welcome too. Thank you. If you enjoyed this video, do subscribe to the channel, Britannia Waives the Rules. Do buy the book. It's my party and I'll lie if I want to. If you buy the book, the channel will continue. Thank you.